Hey guys, welcome to the Confident Man podcast. I'm so glad you joined me here today. We are continuing our March Man Month series, and today we're going to be talking about classic literature and men, and we're doing it with Dr. Louis Markos. Now, Dr. Markos is an authority on C.S. Lewis, apologetics, ancient Greek, and Roman literature. He's the author of 25 books, as well as a lecturer on a couple of great courses series. One of them is The Life and Writings of C.S. Lewis. That's the one I saw him on, and just incredible. And today he's going to join us and talk about how classic literature can help men be better men, how we talk through some of the ancient stories and how men have applied them throughout history. We look into the stories that really pass down character and how story is one of the best ways to pass character traits to the next generation. We talk about some of the classics like Homer's Illiad and Odyssey, the writings of C.S. Lewis, J.R.R. Tolkien, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, and what they can do to teach us how to be men today. Now, the thing about this video is the video quality didn't really come out so well. We had enough struggles with the audio, so I'm going to be posting it, but the video will be static, but you can still listen to the whole podcast here on the channel. To find out more about Dr. Markos, I encourage you to do it. Check out the links in the show notes. It talks about the many books he's written. His Amazon page is on there, and also links to his great courses and some of his other things, so you can find out more about him. So check out the podcast. Hope you enjoy it.
Welcome to the Confident Man Podcast, empowering men with the confidence they need to live their adventure. Now, here is your host, David Maxwell.
Dr. Markos, thanks for being with us on the Confident Man Podcast. I appreciate you as we talk about masculinity and reading today.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I'm looking forward to the dialogue.
We're kind of jumping into what I want to do is I want to help men kind of get a better understanding of good reading that's out there, because I feel like there's an attack on reading today. Have you noticed that where you teach at the school, people just not encouraged to read or reading, short bites, nothing long. And so when it comes to some of the great classics, people just aren't motivated to read.
There really is. And it's bad for all students, but I think it's worse for the boys. Somehow it's unmanly to read, or you're not going to learn anything from that, or that's a girly thing to do, which is ridiculous. I mean, David, the greatest soldier of all time, Alexander the Great, is Alexander the Great because he read the Iliad over and over again. And the other great soldier, Julius Caesar, also read the Iliad, read about Achilles, read these things. Patton, one of the greatest modern soldiers, was a big reader, especially in antiquity and things like that. So it's a false idea, but it's become very, very strong, this idea that a man only acts. Well,
Yeah.
If you go back to Aristotle, courage is not the same thing as like rushing in and being cocky and whatnot. Courage goes hand in hand with wisdom or prudence or intelligence. So if you're going to act, you need to reason. And if you're going to reason, you need to read. And anyway, the greatest role models are out there. We'll talk about later. But yes, there is a turning away from reading. And of course, all of this is made worse by this idea that the classics are dead white males or something like that, or it's somehow oppressive, or it's a propaganda kind of things. I mean, we read these great works because they have passed the test of time. They continue to be read, and they have influenced not only the greatest thinkers, but the most manly men.
And that's true. And when I think about it, the thing I like about when you think about the classics, they're written as stories. And I think that's one of the things that's helped them not only communicate truths and values, but they've, like you said, passed down for generation to generation. So it's not like we watch a movie that was made 20 years ago and we're like, okay, the special effects aren't that great compared to the movies today. But when you read, it's in your mind. And to me, that's what kind of opens it up to everybody to really receive from it.
It does. I wrote a book a while back called On the Shoulders of Hobbits, The Road to Virtue with Tolkien and Lewis. And the point of that is, until the very modern period, it was understood sort of globally that the way you pass down virtue is through stories.
Mm-hmm.
You incarnate them in stories, and people live out those stories. And the stories don't only teach you the glory of virtue, they teach you the danger of vice.
Yeah.
Bill was the name that wrote the Book of Virtues. Bill Bennett, who
Yeah.
was, I think, the third Secretary of Education under Ronald Reagan. He published a book called The Book of Virtues, and he collected stories from the Bible, from mythology, from history, from legend, all these stories to help illustrate both virtues and vices. And it was a huge bestseller. And David, I always laugh by saying, if he had, it was a great book, but if he had published that 150 years ago, people would have been, duh, well, of course. But it was actually a novel thing because we forgot that's how you pass down courage. And so I don't want to get into it. Have you seen the new Avatar yet?
I haven't seen it yet. No.
In one way, of course, it's ridiculous, new age, pantheism, paganism. But if you watch it, you will find out that whatever he wanted to do, it's one of the most conservative movies that have come out in the last 5 years, because we're looking basically at Native American, Indian, Maori tribes, basically, and they have an incredibly conservative traditional structure where the male knows that his job is to protect and to pass down the stories of these great heroes. So whatever Cameron meant to do, he has actually affirmed what is very important to a traditional conservative view of the world, that the man is the protector, but he understands that he is part of a tradition of other protectors, and those stories are being passed down, whether orally, like in a primitive thing, or in a written way. It's still the stories that are being passed down, and we inhabit those stories and live them out.
That makes me think about, I was reading one of Patton's biographies, and it talked about how much he read and how so much of his desire to be a general, to be great, was because of the stories he heard of his grandfather, of his, all these ancestors he had, and how that motivated him. And I feel like we've lost something like that today in our generation.
I think we have. I mean, it's almost considered somehow old-fashioned. But this idea, you're right. I mean, there was a time where whenever he served in World War II, his father served in World War I. His father before was, I don't know, the Spanish-American War. Before that was the Civil War, all the way back to the American Revolution or something. But there was that idea of passing down that standard and legacy of courage. But again, it is real, thoughtful courage. It is not cockiness or rushing in, like, what do you call those people, a whirling dervish, and actually causing more problem. The army does not like those crazy people that come rushing in. All they do is cause destruction. That is not courage. Courage is wisdom tied to bravery.
Today, we have a bunch of men who are encouraged to kind of put their head down, get things done in a business sense, in a productivity sense. But I think they're missing something in their own examination. What I find with men is they kind of take the scorecard of how much money am I making, how many women am I sleeping with, all these things. So they never examine their own life and figure out who and what am I. Have you found that?
It is true. And, we have what we might call a double breakdown in the family. Not only do we have the tragedy of fatherlessness, right? There's no father there, but we haven't just lost a father, David. It wasn't that long ago that there would be a grandfather living very close by, if not in the same house. And a lot of young boys, their first understanding of manliness actually came from their grandfather. Their father might be working too hard or traveling a lot. And who was the grandfather? He's the one that taught you to shoot a rifle. He's the one who taught you how to make bird sounds and camping and all that sort of stuff. And it was passed down. There might be an uncle, but we've really lost the wisdom of the grandfather, who not only has the wisdom of age and experience, but often has the time, because he's retired, to invest in the grandson. And look, everybody needs the blessing, the boys and the girls. But I tell you, if the boy does not get the blessing from his father or grandfather or maybe an uncle, he doesn't move on. The girls need that, but they're more flexible and they'll make it. Without the boy getting that paternal blessing, he I don't know, he doesn't really start. Sometimes he doesn't act. This sounds weird, David, but he doesn't know he's a man
Yeah.
until someone says to him, another man, a woman can't do this, another man has to say to him, you are a man now and you are responsible. And again, the girls just get by, okay?
Hmm.
But the men and the boys need that. And part of that is conveyed through stories, starting with the stories of your own family, like Patton
Yeah.
with his grandfather. But it's also the family of other men who have
Hmm.
shown themselves worthy and strong, whether it's an Aragon in Lord of the Rings or whether it's Achilles or Odysseus. It is a role model that embodies what it means to be a man.
Yeah, it's funny. This weekend, I was at a funeral for my father-in-law, and the grandkids each shared. And it's funny how many of them, when you mentioned the grandfather, it really hit me because they mentioned the time he spent with them, just doing silly stuff, shooting BB guns, walking through the woods. But then they remembered the stories he told. He told stories of a friend of his who they were kind of funny stories. And all of the kids mentioned those stories. They remembered those stories as much as anything else that he did with them was just sitting at night and telling them a story like before they went to bed and stuff like that. So I think that is an example of the power of story.
It is. It's the story that it tells us how to behave. It
Hmm.
tells us where we get our sense of value. Again, just what it means to be a hero, or in this
Yeah.
case, what it means to be a man.
Mm.
And again, stories have always been. And you know what? Look at the Christians still understand. We understand that we need to teach children Bible stories.
Yeah.
Well, we need to understand that we need to teach a wider array of stories. I published a book recently called The Myth Made Fact, reading Greek and Roman mythology through Christian eyes. And the idea is, what can we learn from these ancient? One of the reasons that Jordan Peterson is so successful and is listened to by so many men, women too, but especially by young men,
Yeah.
is that he tells stories and he sets the bar high.
Yeah.
And men need that challenge. Will you live up to this hero? And, it's also a problem. It used to be that their heroes were astronauts or like honorable baseball players. But
Yeah.
more and more, when their heroes are, rap stars or something like that, or silly celebrities, it really hurts.
Yeah.
We need to set the bar higher. But again, the thing about a story is that it doesn't just give us a hero in the abstract. It
Hmm.
gives us a hero within a setting of competing loyalties and
Mm.
competing responsibilities. And how do we behave? Like I tell my students, I do believe in WWJD. What would Jesus do? But I
Yeah.
also want you to ask, what would Achilles do? What
Yeah.
would Odysseus do? Right? What would King Arthur do?
Yeah.
We also learn that way.
One of the things I think, especially for men, the power of story is it kind of gets past that, okay, let me get things done. I have to take care of my business, provide for my family and all that. I think there's a realm that story kind of helps get past that facade and mask that a lot of times men will put on. How are you doing? I'm fine. But the story kind of gets into their soul a little bit. And I think that's where, as they've been attacked, we've seen men become more shallow because they don't have the ability to think deeply today.
So they have no roots,
Yeah.
right? Something like heroism or courage is just an abstraction. It's not tied to anything. It's not part of a narrative, part of a story. What was that guy's name? I really liked him. Oh my gosh, they were wild at heart. John Eldridge. I don't
Yeah.
know if he's
Yeah.
still around much, but he did a really good short book that he turned into a video series called Epic. And he speaks of, sometimes it's called the meta narrative, the sort of overarching narrative, or the sacred story of creation and fall and redemption, talking about men needing a dragon to fight and a damsel to
Hmm.
save. And again, this seems sort of naive or worse, somehow sexist. But this is truly who we are and how we are made. And again, the stories bring that. That's why men really plot to the movie Braveheart, and
Yeah.
also the movie Gladiator. When those came out, there was another one called The Patriot that was very similar.
Yeah.
These are real heroes, not what they're calling the beta males together.
Yeah.
That twin of a little guy that's in Dune. I can't even remember his name. He's got some strange French name. This is the new hero. We need some John Waynes again, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we need, at least we got that cool guy that's a Christian from Guardians of the Galaxy. What's his
Yeah.
name?
Yeah.
Chris. You know
Yeah.
what I'm talking about.
Star-Lord, the guy.
Yeah, Star-Lord. I think at least he's a man, and he tries
Yeah.
to make movies where he is a man.
Yeah.
But it's sort of hard to find. And actually, The Rock is very good too, because he
Yeah.
can be a He-Man, but he can also be like a father, but still in a protective way. Just like
Mhm.
Schwarzenegger used to do He-Man movies, and then he made family movies, and I think both of them were good because
Yeah.
they presented someone that could be sensitive but was strong and especially responsible.
Yeah.
That's the thing. You know, sometimes we want power, but we don't want responsibility with it. That doesn't
Yeah.
work that way.
Well, and that's the thing. Yeah, I think story communicates that
Yeah.
your decisions matter. You know, we look at that heroes or anti-heroes of the past in stories who they made the right decision, good things happen. They made the wrong decisions, bad things happen.
Yeah.
You know, and I think that stays with you more than someone just telling you don't do that. You
Well,
think,
look, when you were a kid, did somebody teach you the story of the boy who cried wolf? Do you remember
yeah,
that one?
uh-huh,
I mean, I remember my son. He understood how important it was to be honest,
yeah,
and he was frightened by it because he was very young when I told him that's important. We
yeah,
need to get inside that story, and because again, we are story making creatures.
yeah,
We are part of the story, but we also create stories, and it's natural for us to do it. And even when we don't have the art of writing, then we pass them down orally. We tell the stories, we tell them visually, whatnot, and it's just wonderful. Are you watching The Chosen?
yeah, yeah. Loving
Yeah.
The
Now
Chosen.
I didn't watch last night yet, but I watched episode 4, and they do this amazing thing where we kind of forget that Jesus sent the disciples out 2 by 2, giving them power to cast out demons and to heal the sick and whatnot. And
Yeah,
what they did is totally, I've never seen anybody do this. They gave us at the beginning of episode 4 a quick overview of the disciples, and it's in black and white, and it's basically a silent movie as they are going from place to place
wow,
and healing people. And it makes it seem sort of eternal, something lost in time, but also right
yeah,
now. You get a chance. Like I said, that one aired last week. I haven't watched last night's yet.
yeah. I haven't seen the latest one yet.
But it's great. I mean, we're seeing a different. You know, heroism doesn't always mean killing people. I mean, the
Yeah,
heroism of the martyrs is the heroism of turning the other cheek, but
yeah,
it's always from a position of strength and a
hmm,
position of firm and secure self-knowledge of who we are as a man and who we are in Christ. And
yeah,
so again, it doesn't always mean killing. It might be being killed, but it means having it. Here's a word that we've lost. See, it all fell apart, David, when that book was published called How to Win Friends and Influence People. Now, I don't
hmm,
want to attack him. There's some good ideas there,
yeah,
but that was the breaking point. Before that book, self-help books, especially for men, were about honesty, integrity, courage, the difficult virtues. It's about who you are as a man. After that book, it's all about self-help. It's all about
mm,
therapy. It's all about getting by and making connections and whatnot. It is
yeah,
not
yeah,
about who you are. Again, I love that word integrity,
yeah,
David. It's like your father or grandfather teaching you the manly handshake. Nobody does
hmm,
that anymore, right?
yeah,
Firm handshake. Look the man directly in the eyes.
yeah,
You're firm, okay? And we've lost that, and so they're not instructed in what it means to have integrity. Think of the word integrity. It's like the word integer, a whole number.
hmm,
The man of
hmm,
integrity. Or here, we have lost this. Telling our sons, our grandsons, be a man of your word.
yeah, yeah,
Now, what does that mean, David? That doesn't just mean don't tell a lie. It means be a man of, that is who you are. The essence of you is truth and wholeness and integrity.
yeah,
And we've really lost that. That's much different than don't get caught. Okay.
yeah,
Be a man of
exactly.
the word.
Yeah, if you don't get caught, like I've heard people say, if you're not cheating, you're not trying. And I'm like,
Oh,
that's like the worst thing to tell. Now, one thing that's been interesting to me is over the last few years, been hanging out with some different people who are very much into anime.
okay.
And I almost consider anime modern day mythology,
Yeah.
just because so many of the stories I find some of these great themes: sacrifice,
Yep.
standing up for someone else. And it's amazing how many young men I come across who were really into anime. And a lot of times their favorites have a hero who is struggling to overcome great odds, or who
Good.
people who sacrifice their life to save others. And I thought, these are just stories done in this way, but a lot of young men are attracted to that in that because I think they're missing that element in their own
Yeah.
life.
It's kind of sad they've got to go to cartoons to get that.
Yeah, I know.
They can't get it reading actual books or watching real. Like I said, every so often we do get, although Braveheart's already maybe 20 years old. Uh, I'm trying to think if there's been any recent movie that really has a hero. Well, like I said, actually, Avatar does in an odd way.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, has a manly hero who, again, takes agency, takes responsibility for his
yeah.
actions and responsibility for other people. Is not just a lone wolf, but is working within a society, again, of competing duties and responsibilities that he has to navigate and has to
Mhm.
know who he is, or he can't know what to do.
Yeah,
And again,
yeah,
stories are good at filling out what it means. Who am I? Why am I here? What is my purpose?
yeah,
What is
yeah,
the good man? What does it mean to be a citizen? Bigger questions like this. And we've lost that. We
yeah.
need role models.
Yeah,
The
and I
worst thing in
think
the world was, what, Charles Barkley? I'm not a role model. That was a
yeah,
really bad moment in
yeah.
the history of humanity. Yes, you are responsible to be a role model.
Well, and I think so many young men today are looking for what is my place? And I think the fact that they don't have story in their life, they don't have these classic stories. A lot of times they don't know where to find themselves when they don't have a dad, when they don't have another man who speaks into their life. So, so let's talk about a few examples. When I know I listened to your great course you did on the life and writings of C.S. Lewis. So when you think of C.S. Lewis's writings, especially his fantasy literature, what are some of the examples of you think some of the best manly lessons that come through some of the different stories he wrote?
Okay, everybody knows the Chronicles of Narnia the best, but
Yeah.
Lewis wrote a trilogy of science fiction novels that's called the Space Trilogy. Sometimes it's called the Ransom Trilogy, the Cosmic Trilogy, and the first one is called Out of the Silent Planet. And the hero is a guy named Ransom. And in the beginning, Ransom is a sort of materialist, naturalist, no understanding of the supernatural, just facts and figures. And he is transported to Mars, Malacandra, as they call it. And while he's there, he had to use a phrase of Lewis, he has to gain a chest. He
Mm,
becomes a man, and he ends up being stranded with a group of rational creatures known as the Cross, and they sort of look like giant beavers, and they're Homeric warriors. And Ransom learns their language, and he joins them, and he goes on a hunt with them, almost like a Beowulf story. And he starts to understand what it means to be brave, what it means, excuse me, what it means to be tested. Uh,
mm.
and he changes, and then in the second book, which is it's called Paralandra, it takes place on Venus, and it is a replaying of the temptation of Eve,
Oh
except
wow.
this time Eve doesn't give in. Sorry for the
Mhm.
spoiler. And this time the Eve character has Ransom to help her, and
Mm,
Ransom ends up taking on this Satan figure. He's basically a man who's been possessed fully. And what's really funny is he keeps defeating his arguments, but he realizes that this guy is like a broken record. He'll never stop, and there's no way. And so he realizes in this flash that he has to actually fight him physically and defeat him. And there's this sort of epic battle, this struggle between the two, where he must physically defeat evil. This is sort of an amazing thing. In the Narnia stories, Peter is a wonderful moment. Peter is the High King. He will become the High King, the eldest of the Pevensey children, And there's a great scene where the wolf, the evil wolf, like the SS following the White Witch, the evil wolf attacks Susan and Lucy, the two girls who were up in a tree. And Peter shows up, and Aslan says, "Step back. Let the young prince win his spurs," which is wonderful.
Mhm.
Every man
Yeah.
loves that. And he has to fight the beast and kill it. And after he kills it, there's a wonderful moment that every boy that's ever read the Narnia books loves, right? Where after he kills him, Aslan says, "Peter, your sword is dirty. Clean your sword. Always clean your sword." And he cleans it on the grass and puts it back in.
Yeah.
Lots of different meanings for that. But you end this, right? You didn't start it, but you are ending it, and you are sheathing your sword and not carrying it around bloody. And I don't know, there's just something about that phrase that I think resonates with boys, especially. A lot of girls like it, but boys especially resonate with that. We see his courage and we see his strength. We watch young Prince Caspian have to grow into a man and gain courage and stand up against his evil, usurping uncle Miraz. And again, we see boys of all types. Eustace Clarence Scrubb in Voyage of the Dawn Treader is a terrible little nerdy kid. But even he doesn't become a He-Man, but he becomes a courageous person who knows himself and is willing to sacrifice himself if he must. This is what I mean. Not every man is going to be super bulky, but every man is called to have moral courage, to stand in the gap, to take the blame if he must take the blame, right? To do it. And when we go, okay, one of the things that Lewis talks a lot about in his essays, Lewis always hated school stories. And I had to kind of read to figure out what he meant by that. What he meant by school stories are these stories about the kid in school who is picked on, right, or looked down on, and then something happens and he gets back at the bullies and all that sort of stuff. And the trouble with those stories is, more often than not, they play on our vanity. They play on feelings of revenge. They're really not healthy. Now, a lot of Christians, unfortunately, don't read fantasy, right? It's going to be an opening to the demonic. He said, no. The thing about true fantasy, like the Narnia Chronicles or Lord of the Rings, true fantasy, that does not breed vanity and all that. It breeds a sense of humility and awe and wonder, but it also breeds courage. I can face the dragon, but I face the dragon with a sense of respect for the strength of that. David, I've read a few people that said that Disney and movies like that are responsible for a growing number of people who are being mauled by wild animals. And the reasoning behind that is, and I like the movies, but because they've over-cutified lions and tigers and bears, oh my, we've lost our respect and awe for the wild animal. And people have been actually killed or mauled by that. So fantasy explains to us that the odds are immense and it may cause our death, like in the Lord of the Rings. We are going to step into the jaws. We are going to make ourselves the bait.
You've been listening to the Confident Man Podcast. Click subscribe so you don't miss a future episode. You can connect with David on Facebook and Instagram at David the Maxwell. Find resources to help you as a man at theconfidentman.me. That's theconfidentman.me.